Masechet Moed Katan Daf Vav. Four diverse topics. First about grave markers, diverse species, kilayim, watering a garden, and then very interesting about trapping moles and how to destroy an anthole. This could be practical. Gemara has some really interesting advice regarding that. Okay, we mentioned that on Chol Moed, the Bet Din would send out agents to go and mark any graves that may have the mark might not be marked, or the mark fell, so that people will be able to avoid tum'ah. And so here are some rules about when you do see a marker, what does that mean? If you find a stone that is marked, in other words, here it says here this is impurity, then that means that immediately under that stone you know that there is something buried, a person buried or bones buried there. So avoid it. Shetayim im yeshid benehen tameh. If you find two markers, like in this picture, if there is plaster in between them, then you have to assume that the whole area in between them is tameh. So this would be like a headstone and a footstone, and there would be plaster poured between, lime poured between, to show that the entire space between is tameh. But vim ensid benehen tahor. But if there's no plaster poured between, then it's just two individual rocks. Under each one is tameh, but the space in between is tahor. Okay, so that's that's the meaning of the markers. When they put the markers in the first place, they would put plaster in between if it was tameh in between, otherwise not. Okay, we have a challenge to that. Are you going to assume that the area in between two stones, when there is no lime there, is tahor, even if it's not plowed? We have the question because we have a braita v'hatanya matzah even achat mitzuyena tachteha tameh. One stone, whatever is under it is tameh. That's easy case. Shetayim im yesh choresh benehen tahor ve'im lav benehen tameh. But here's where it's different. If you have two stones, if it's plowed between the two stones, then it's tahor. Well, one reason is because since it's plowed, even if there was something there, the plowing would have destroyed it. And then moved it away, broken into little pieces. But if it's not plowed between, then whatever is between is tameh. So this is a contradiction, because up here we said if there's two stones, whatever is between them is tahor, and even if there's nothing, when there's nothing between them. And here it doesn't say there's any line between them, so it sounds like it's the same case, nothing between them, and yet between them is tameh. So how do we resolve this? Amarav Papa hacha keshasid shafuch al rashehen umrudeh lechan ulchan. Or we're talking about a case where there is lime that's poured on top and is also sloping down. It's thinly spread down onto the side. And so it looks like, in fact, someone was pouring the lime on this one and then was continuing and pouring it on the side also to get to the next one. So it's kind of like it was poured in between. So if it was plowed in between, we assume in between is tahor, because in that case, we assume that he only put lime on top of the stone as a marker. And then while he was plowing, that caused the lime to fall down onto the side of the rock. But really, it means only under those two rocks, but not in between. But if it was not plowed, then how did the lime get onto the side of the rock? Oh, it must be that the person who put the marker there meant to put the to mark the side, and maybe he was then continuing over to the other, and therefore that means that everything in between is also tameh. So this resolves the two cases. If there's only a marker on top of the two stones, then they are separated only under the two stones. Themselves are tameh, but if there is lime on the sides of the stone and it was not plowed in between, then that on the side of the stone indicates that they are meant as a headstone and footstone, and there must be a body all the way underneath, and the whole area in between is tameh. Amar Rabbi Aseh, Mesar echad mesuyan hu tameh v'chol hasedeh kula tehora. Okay, now more rules about markers if you find a one marker at the border of a field. So that means under that marker will be tameh. The rest of the field is totally fine because someone put the marker there to indicate only there. Same thing with two shenaim hen tamein v'chlasede kulat tehora. Two markers somewhere on the edges of the field. Only under there will be tameh. The rest of the field is fine. Even three shelosha hen tamein v'chlasede kulat tehora. Even three. Because even three can't mark the corners of a field, so it's only under those rocks, and the rest of the field is tameh. Here's where it's different. Arba'a hen tehorin v'chol hasadeh kulat teme'ah. When it's four, it's actually the opposite. Under the marker, under those stones themselves is tahor, but it's between all those stones, the entire field. When those stones are on the boundary, then that field will be tameh. So what's the reason for this? Well, actually, we can explain it here. Damar Moed en marchikin siyun mimekom tum'ah shelo lafsid et eretz Yisrael. If you find a field or whatever area as tameh, you want to put the marker close by, not too far away. If you put it too far away, then maybe you're adding more to make people more careful. But you don't want to do that because then all that area will be unusable, and we don't want to cause a loss of usable area in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, you're not going to put it on top of the tum'ah because then it's too late. You want to put it, if it's a whole field, right at the border where the tum'ah begins. So that means that wherever that marker is, right under the marker is tahor, because you put the marker beforehand. You put it while it's still tahor, just before the border of where it becomes tameh. So that's why under those four rocks is tahor, but between the rocks, the whole field is tameh. Because once it's four, you know that that's marking the rectangle boundaries of the tameh field. All right, so that's those are good ways to read these signs. Now next, v'yotzin af al hakilayim during Chol HaMoed, the Bet Din will also send out messengers to check out, to make sure that there's no kilayim, that there's no diverse species that are growing. What would they do if they find it? We're going to see. Now we have a good question. When do the agents go out to make sure that there's no kilayim growing? Do they really go on Chol HaMoed, Sukkot, or Chol HaMoed Pesach? We learned in the Mishnah in Shekalim 1:1. Actually, the Mishnah we're about to quote is a little different than the Mishnah that we actually have in Shekalim, which is really interesting. It means that there were different variations of Mishnayot, or this is a Braita that's very similar to our Mishnah, but not exactly the same. Okay, in either case, it's a Tanaitic source that says that it's on the 1st of Adar. That's when we send out messengers to announce, hey, everybody, go to your fields. Well, first of all, give machazit a shekel. And second of all, check out your fields and see if there's any kilayim and uproot it. And then that's what we do on the 1st of Adar. On the 15th of Adar, number one, we read Megillah in walled cities. We also in the Kaveset Derachim, and we also do repairs for public good, like taking out the thorns from the roads, fixing the streets, making sure all mikvot have at least 40 se'ah in them. And we do everything on that 15th of Adar. In addition to marking graves and going out with 4 kilayim, we send the agents to go and pluck out any kilayim that they find. So this over here, it says we announce it on the 1st of Adar and we go and do it on the 15th of Adar. That's totally different from our Mishnah in Moed Katan, which says that we do this on Chol HaMoed. So which one is it? Presumably Chol HaMoed Pesach. That's when things really start growing. Not Sukkot too much. Okay, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina. We have two answers to the question. Chad Amar kan be'bachir, kan be'afil. We're talking about early crops that grow early. Already in the middle of Adar, you're going to see that they're starting to grow, and we have to make sure to uproot them, because kilayim, as we said a few times, isn't just planting them together. Even if the seeds just got mixed up and ends up growing together, I'm still responsible. So already in Adar, the early crop is growing. You have to take that out, and then you have to come back on Chol HaMoed Pesach a month later, because there are things that are growing late, and you got to take out the kilayim there. The second answer is very similar. Kan bizraim, kan birakot. One Mishnah, the one in Shekalim, is talking about grain, because those grow early. By Adad, you got to go and check out the grain, make sure there's no diverse species. And the Mishnah, that was the Mishnah over there in Shekalim. The Mishnah here, which says Pesach, that's talking about vegetables. Vegetables take longer to grow, and so you're going to come back in Pesach to check the kilayim of the vegetables. Okay, very good. Amar Rabbi Aseh, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Lo shanu ela she'en nisan nikar, aval nisan nikar yotzin alehen. Rabbi Yochanan adds that this is only true that the messengers go out at the beginning of, in the middle of Adad. That's only when the blossoms were not recognizable earlier. But if in that year, because of the weather, it started blossoming even earlier, let's say like now, Tu Bishvat, then we'd have to go and check out the kilayim before. Whenever it's growing, that's the point. So the Adad and Pesach markers are just the usual, but in fact, you'd have to take it out anytime. Okay, good. Now, why specifically on Chol HaMoed would we go and send the messengers? Maybe they want to enjoy the holiday with their family. Why are we going to go make people do work? Could do it after Pesach is finished or before. A very practical reason. It's because their labor is cheap at this time. Why is labor cheap? Since people cannot do regular work on Chol HaMoed, right? The types of work that one can do are very restricted. That's what this whole subject is about. Only a davar haved, something that will be substantial loss. So you know what? Most farmers are not doing much work, and they're not hiring laborers during Chol HaMoed. Therefore, the laborers are looking around, looking for something to do. And you can find there's more supply, and so therefore it is cheaper. It's very interesting because the reason is there's more supply is because the rabbis themselves said that you're not allowed to do all this agricultural labor. Of course, the rabbis, based on the principles of the Torah. And then the rabbis come and say, oh yeah, for this it's an exception. But it's a good reason to justify that. The exception is for a mitzvah, to make sure that people are not violating kilayim. And so therefore, this is a good time to do it, especially because let's see who pays for it. We learn from this that who pays these day laborers to go and remove the kilayim at the behest of the Bet Din? It's actually the temple treasury. Everyone gives the machasita shekel and other donations that they give. The leftover of that will go towards removing kilayim. So there's a public service that the Bet HaMikdash sponsors to get rid of kilayim in the land. Okay, because if you might think that perhaps it's the farmer themselves that has to pay for it, and so the court would just go out and issue a demand. Hey, you have kilayim here, you better do it. And maybe the court will even get the day laborers, but then send the bill to the farmer, which makes sense. It's his farm after all anyway. Is to take care of it. So if in fact the farmer was paying for it, then wouldn't matter to the rabbis to make sure to get it at the lowest price. It's the farmer's responsibility. Let the farmer go and find cheap day laborers at a good time at a good price. But since we're talking about public funds that were donated to Bet HaMikdash, that's why you have to be even more careful in preserving public funds than private funds, and that's why we're able to do it. That's why they say do it specifically on Chol HaMoed in order to reduce the cost. Okay, ve'ad kama. Now, a general law about kilayim. How much kilayim is tolerable? If you have just one leaf, is that a problem? Or do you violate kilayim? No, just like in other laws of isurim, there's a concept of bitul. If it's only a little bit, it's considered nullified. It's nothing. So what's the ratio of different types of species together that would trigger the prohibition. Amarav Shmuel bar Yitzchak keota sheshaninu. So we learned this in a Mishnah in Masechet Kilayim. Kol se'ah. Se'ah is a volume measure, a large one. Sheyesh ba'arov ha'zera mimin acher yima'eh. It has a quarter kav of a different type of seed. You have to reduce it. That if you calculate, that ends up being 1 out of 24. So for less than 1/24th is a different species, then you can leave it alone. But if it's more, then you have to go and remove that other species until it's less. Vehatanya, question. Hitkinu shiyu mafkirin kol hasadeh kula. Why when he's saying that they go out and then we have to go and pay for the laborers to pick it, this doesn't make sense because we have a braita that says that they made a takana, the rabbis made a takana, that if the inspectors came and found a field with kilayim in it, they would declare the field hefker, ownerless. That was like a fine for the farmer. Now the farmer can't benefit at all from it, and then other people would come, and whoever wants, they can just go and take it, and they would just take everything. And so it wouldn't be that we're hiring day laborers to pick out the minority of the species. So what's going on? There was a difference. He says kinu. So before we're talking about the situation before the ordinance, and here it's after they made this decree. So now we see a really fascinating development of this law. The Tanya. Barishona, at first, the agents of the court would come. Hey, there's kilayim here, and they would hire the laborers, and the laborers would pull out the diverse species and throw it on the floor so that the animals could eat it. It could be in other parallels to this, that they're throwing it on the floor to shame the farmer, like, hey, look at this here, that you left this kilayim. But anyway, the animals were there, so the animals ate it. And the farmers, they were overjoyed for two reasons. Number one, these laborers are coming and weeding, taking the weeds out of the field, and that helps the field grow better. I mean, after all, if you're growing, species A, you don't want that little bit of species B around because it's just sucking up nutrients from the ground. So thank you for improving my land. And you're also feeding it to my animals. So double thank you. And they get the service for free. So you see, the problem is, the betin is trying to make sure to get rid of kilayim, but actually they're creating an incentive for farmers to leave the kilayim and wait for the betin to come and take care of the whole problem for them and pay for it too. Okay, so you see, this is not a good situation. So hitkinu shihu okrim umashlichin al haderachim. So then the sages said, listen, when the court laborers come, they should pull out the bad species and throw it to the road, so that the animals won't have access, so they don't benefit from it. Okay, they weren't as happy, the farmers, but they were happy on one count. At least they get the free weeding of their garden. So then, so they made a third takana that if they come and they find that this field the kilayim was not taken care of, they actually confiscate the field, at least for that growth season, and say anyone who wants can come and take whatever they want. And now this time that'll work, and no farmer wants to lose all of his crops, so the farmer will make sure to hire his own people to take care of the problem before the court inspectors come. All right, so that's really interesting how they had to, when sometimes you solve one problem, you create another problem until you get just the right legislation in place. And next Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, where we have a little outline. So now we did the diverse species, we're up to watering a garden in this Mishnah. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we saw he was mentioned in the very first Mishnah. He's more machmir than other Tanaim regarding watering gardens and fields during Chol HaMoed. So it says, Moshchina tamay me'ilan le'ilan. Here's one thing he permits. If you have a lot of water that gathers around one tree, and you don't need all that water for one tree, and the tree next door nearby needs water, so then you're permitted to make a little channel and bring the water, excess water from this tree to that tree, because after all, it is a substantial loss. The trees need water, and so you can bring it. And it's not so much work. What you may not do, according to the Eliezer ben Yaakov, is take that water from that one tree and go and now water the entire field, because the entire field doesn't need water. Yeah, it would be helpful, and the trees there would be happier because they have deep roots and the roots go all over, and so they'll grow even more. But they won't die if you don't do that. So therefore, you're only allowed to bring the water a little bit right to the trees themselves, which is necessary for their survival, but not so to prevent loss, but not for extra gain. And a similar principle, if there are plants that you did not water before the holiday started, you can't go and decide to start watering them on the holiday, right? Obviously, if you didn't water them before, then they don't really need water. They're not going to die. Yeah, it'd be nice. They'd be happy to get some water. But if you waited this long, wait till after the holiday and they'll be okay. So that's all the Bili is. But the sages say in both cases it's permitted. See, the sages here must be the Bimeir, who we also saw earlier. Bimeir was the most lenient, and he said even if it's not a substantial loss, even if it's just going to benefit someone, that's also permitted on Chol HaMoed. And so that's he's very lenient regarding this. All right, that's the Mishnah. Amar Rav Yehuda, im hayta sadeh mitunenet mutar. Okay, Rav Yehuda says, even according to the Eliezer ben Yaakov, who's pretty strict, and says if you didn't water it before, then you can't water it. But if it was a moist field and it dried up, that's mitunenet, right? So it was moist before, so I didn't have to water it, and now it dried up just now on the holiday, and now it's going to be unusable if I don't give it water. Then that's considered a substantial loss and is permitted. Tanya Namihachi, although Rav Yehuda said it, the second generation Amora, he has backing from a Braita that says the same thing. This is repeating what we said, what Eliezer ben Yaakov says in the Mishnah. It says when it says you're not allowed to water something on the holiday, that only refers to any plants that did not drink before the holiday started. That then you're not allowed to start watering them on the holiday. But if you started giving them water before and then they're dependent on that water, then it's permitted. Okay, we know that, we saw that. And here's the one that's relevant. But if it was a field that was moist before the holiday started, and so therefore it didn't need watering, and only now it dried out and needs watering, then that's permitted. That's exactly what Rav Yehuda says. Now it adds another interesting halacha, that a sedeh garid, this seems to refer to a field that is you didn't plant on anything on it yet, but you plan to, and so you need to water it for the future, for the future planting. So here, no good, according to the first Tana and Mashkin sedeh garid. You can't pre-water something that is not even anything planted. There's nothing going to die. But Chachamim matirim bazeh bazeh. But Chachamim say it's permitted in both cases, even if you didn't water it before and if you didn't plant anything in it yet. All these cases are permitted according to Chachamim. Okay, Ravina is now going to make a comment on this leniency of the Chachamim. Amar Ravina shma mina hai tarbisa shareh letarbuse bechula demoada. We can learn from here that a garden, you're allowed to sprinkle water on the garden during Chol HaMoed. How does he know that? Sedeh garid my ta'ama. When talking about a field that I didn't plant anything in the field yet, and you just said is permitted. Why? Because by giving it water now, what would have been late crops will become early crops. And that is considered a substantial loss. If it's gonna ripen much later, then I'm gonna lose out on the market share. Better if it's early, and that's permitted. If that's permitted, then hachaname afla mashvila charfa. If I have my garden, that was true in the field, it's true in the garden too. If I can pre-water it, then things will grow faster in that land. And so even though there's nothing growing now, nothing's going to die. That is for Chachamim, that is considered good enough, and it will prevent some loss, and even if it's for gain, that is permitted according to Chachamim. Tenora banan, marbisin sede lavan b'shevi'it, aval lo b'moed. Another braita says you can water a field. A sede lavan is a grain field. This looks all white during Shevi'it. And we discussed this already. There's not a problem of giving water during Shevi'it. Avalo b'moed, but not during Chol HaMoed. Right? These are different reasons. Shevi'it, because you might think that you wouldn't be allowed to work the land. Moed, because it would be a melacha, and so you are allowed to do it in Shevi'it, but not during Moed. Okay, question. V'hatanya marbisin ben b'moed ben b'Shevit. Braita says it's permitted in both cases, even Moed. So that's a contradiction here. One that says that you're not allowed. That's the stringent opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. We saw before that he doesn't allow watering gardens because that's for benefit. It's not going to die, and so you can't do anything for profit, only if it's substantial loss, and so therefore it's prohibited during it's permitted for the Moed. The reason why it might be allowed in the Shevi'it is also because a Moed is only a few days, so maybe it could be okay for a few days. But if you don't water something for the whole year, right, then there'll be very, very substantial loss. That'll be another difference between them. And the second beraita that permits, that would be Rabbanan, and because they permit watering something, even if it's not for substantial loss, even if it's for gain, that's permitted. Tanya idach, and now another beraita that teaches another related law. Marbisin sedeh lavan erev shevi'it kedesh yetzu yerakot b'shevi'it. Velo ad ela shemarbisin sedeh lavan b'shevi'it. You're allowed to give water to a grain field during the 6th year before Shevi'it starts, so that some grain will grow during Shevi'it. And furthermore, you can also water a grain field during the Shevi'it year, so that some will grow afterwards for the 8th year. I think what you see here is we saw already a few times that the rabbis had lots of different leniencies to make things available that they would grow on their own during a Shevi'it and even after, because we don't plant anything, nothing's going to grow. And if they didn't do this, people really would starve to death. It was a big problem, and so they found the various leniencies to allow things to grow on their own. And the essence of Shevi'it isn't that people should starve. The point is that people should be sharing, and so that's true no matter what, right? Even if you water it beforehand and during, it becomes ownerless, and the owner can only take as much as he will eat during that time, but has to make the same amount available for everyone else. So that's the main point, is to equalize everyone in society, not that people should be totally starving. And so these rabbinic leniencies allowed them to survive. And that last Mishnah for today, Sadin et ha'ishut v'et achbarim misidei ha'ilan u'misidei ha'lavan kedarko ba'moed u'b'shevi'it. Okay, these are other ways of improving a land, not directly but indirectly, by removing these various rodents that would destroy and eat the produce of the land. So you are allowed to trap moles, that's ishut, and achbarim, and mice, sedei lan, in an orchard. They go and eat the fruit and they ruin it. And also sedei lavan, also a grain field. And the normal way, however you would usually catch mice, you're allowed to do on Chol HaMoed, even though it's work. But this is substantial loss, because if you let them go, you won't have anything left to eat. And Shevi'it also. Shevi'it is easier because really Shevi'it, you don't have to, there's no problem of working during Shevi'it. You're allowed to do exertion, and you could do other melachot like, killing or trapping. It's just working the land, but you might think that this is in a way working the land because you are doing something that will cause the land to be improved or at least not be destroyed. And so maybe you'll think that this is included in working the land. So this Mishnah teaches that it's permitted. Chachamim argue with Tanakama. It's a bit unusual to have a Tanakama and then Chachamim. Like, who are we supposed to follow? Usually we think Tanakama is the majority opinion, and here it says Chachamim. Okay, so that's a good question. There are some versions that say the Yehuda instead here, but the Kaufman manuscript says Chachamim. So this definitely seems to be the original. Okay, in any case, the Chachamim are more stringent, and they say, yeah, if it's from an orchard, then it's permitted because the mice and the moles are really going to destroy all the fruit in the orchard. But if it's a grain field, then you can only do it in an unusual way. Grain field, they don't cause so much substantial loss, and so therefore you can do it. But if you do it with a shinui and an unusual way of trapping them, would be permitted, but not in the usual way. And lastly, there's a breach in the wall of the garden on Chol Moed. You can fix it and seal it, seal a breach, and on Shevi'it you can even build a wall that's needed. Of course, you can't fence it around totally. That would not allow people to come in and take freely, because you have to allow everyone into your field. But if you do need that wall, not for blocking people, but let's say for animals, then you can build that wall. Okay, my ishut. What is this rodent that's described as ishut? Amar Rav Yehuda, Birya she'en la einayim, is talking about a creature that has no eyes. Well, what creature has no eyes? A mole does in fact have eyes, but they are covered over by its fur and sometimes by skin, and the eyes are very small, and it doesn't use them very much because it's digging holes under the ground, so that they basically atrophy, and then if it comes out into the sunlight, it's going to be totally blinded by it. So their eyes they don't really need them, and they're not very useful. Dr. Sham, is that true? Do you know about mole eyes?
No.
Okay, he is an eye doctor, but not for moles. Okay, so and we do have a pasuk. Amar Rava bar Yishmael. How do we know this from pasuk? This is talking about a curse on evildoers. It says the evildoers, they should be like a snail that melts and disappears when it comes out of its shell, and like a mole that has not seen the sun, meaning a mole that's always underground. It can't come up. That's what the evildoers should be. They should be, hiding underground in jail and not be able to come out and enjoy the sun. Good. Tenor Rabbanan. Sadin. Now we know that Ishut is a mole. So here's a braita that's similar to our Mishnah. Sadin Ishut v'dachbarim misideh halavan u'misideh hailan kedarko. You are allowed to catch the mice from both a grain field and an orchard the way that you would usually do, right? Moles and mice. And now we add yet another thing, that you can destroy ant holes, because ants also, they come and destroy the grain and the fruit. How do you destroy an ant hole? Good question. I don't know, call the exterminator. All right. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, mevi afar mechor zeh v'noten letoch chor zeh v'hen chodkin zeh et zeh. A much simpler way. You don't need any poison or anything. All you have to do is take some soil from one ant hole, move and put it in the other ant hole, and take soil from that one and put it here, because ants excrete some smelly substance, and that's how they communicate. And so in one ant hole, they all have the same smell, and that's how they know that we're friends, we're going to work together. If they smell something foreign, they say, oh, those are enemies, those are enemy ants. And so if you take some dirt from here that has one smell and put it to the other one, then they're going to get all mixed up, and they're going to start a civil war and just kill each other. Okay, seems pretty cruel, but efficient. מה רב יאמר בה שלמיה משמeh דאביה, והוא דכאה בתרי עברי נהרה. And Rav Yemar says, this is not so simple, right? The ants have a large network. And sometimes, in fact, right, they can go over miles. And so this trick will only work if you bring dirt from far away. In fact, it's got to be from the other side of a river where the ants can't get from one to the other. But and only if there's no bridge. If there's a bridge, then ants will go from one side to the river and they'll all know each other, recognize each other's smells. And even if you move dirt from one to the other, so oh, yeah, I know that guy. He's from the other side. He's a friend. Not only a bridge, but even a plank, or a rope. I mean, ants don't care. They walk over anything, no matter how thick or thin it is. Ad kama, and how far away would it have to be for this trick to work? Ad parsa, parsang, which is about 3 miles. Okay, so if it's really far away, impossible to get to, then yes, you can bring the from the one place to the other, it'll be a different smell, they'll kill each other. But if it's anywhere nearby or any way of getting there, then the vast ant network will know that these are not enemies, and they'll have to find another way to trap the ants and save your field. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.